What's up, guys, and welcome back to Eventual Acres. My name is Alan, and hopefully you saw my previous video where I talked about the different equipment that you need in order to get started in making your own mead and wine at home. Now, today I'm actually going to use that equipment to make a traditional mead. It's pretty simple. I went ahead and I sanitized everything. Now, if you remember, I mentioned that you needed honey and you needed some type of yeast. Today we're going to be using Lalvin 71B yeast. It's one of my favorites to use. I find that it works pretty well in all types of conditions, whether it's warmer or colder. Um, and it has a alcohol percentage, I believe, of up to about 14%. So you can make a pretty strong mead with it. So let's go ahead and show you the setup. So this is what we're working with today. As you can see, I've got my growler that I'm planning on using. There's a little bit of sanitizer still left in there. That's not going to hurt anything. There's nothing wrong with that. And I'm going to use about 2 pounds of honey. So I'm going to go ahead and try and shake it up a little bit. As you can see, it's crystallized at the bottom. That's perfectly fine. I'm just going to go ahead and add water to that anyways. We're going to be using really just honey and water to make a traditional mead. Again, I wanted to do something that's a little bit simple and basic for you guys. I don't want to, go and do anything crazy. So when I make mead, I find it easy to just use some type of funnel, as it allows the yeast and the water and honey and everything to just strain itself in. Because if I were to go ahead and just try and pour right in the hole, I'm going to make a mess. That eliminates that. So I'm going to go ahead and start pouring some honey in. It takes a little bit because it's honey, it's slow. As you can see, it's kind of just sitting in the funnel. But it is working its way down. I don't know how well you can see that. So it's going to be a little bit. So I'm going to fast forward to once all of the honey is inside. But watch as it works its way in. You just continue to just pour in a little bit more. Now I've got some of those solid crystallized chunks falling in, so that might just slow it down. But I'm going to add water, and it'll just push everything through. So personally, I don't want to keep pouring the crystallized pieces in because I'm starting to see that it's starting to have trouble getting through the funnel because it is solid. So I'm going to fill this up with some warm water because, as I mentioned, we're just using water and honey today. That's the recipe that I use to make a traditional mead. It's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward. So I'm going to pour some warm water in here, give it a nice shake. That way it breaks up some of the solids. And I'm just going to use the liquid honey that's in here while this warms up. It's slowly starting to uncrystallize a little bit, which is good. But the honey that's in the funnel right now, all the crystals got in there, are really starting to back up in the bottom. So I just give it a little bit shake. So while the honey takes its time to work through the funnel, I just want to talk real quick about the different type of water that you can use when you're brewing. Some people use distilled water. Some people use pre-bottled water or the gallons of water that you can buy at the store. Others use water from the sink. I use water from the sink. I haven't had any issues with it. So it's something I'm comfortable with. I feel that my water is clean. I haven't gotten any reports of any type of grossness, rust, bacteria, whatever in it. I have not had any issues with my water. So I'm comfortable using the tap, but some people just, either don't have clean water where they live, or they just don't feel comfortable using it with fluorides or whatever the state or city puts in the water. If you want to use distilled water or pre-bottled water, that's perfectly fine. If you want to use tap and filter it, that's all a matter of preference. To each their own. I haven't had any issues with tap. So I've shaken this up quite a bit. And as you can see, there's still just a little bit of crystals at the bottom, but the rest of it is really working its way in, which is good. So I'm just going to kind of keep shaking. As you can see with this, the honey is still pretty backed up in the funnel. So sometimes it takes a little bit. I knew that was going to end up being a little bit of an issue once I saw the crystals fall in, but it'll work its way in there eventually. It's not that big of an issue. It just takes a little bit longer. So almost all of the honey has worked its way down the funnel at this point. I poured everything that was in this little container down into the growler. There was just a little bit of crystals left, so I added a little bit more water and shook it up. It all looks pretty shaken now. And then with the other container of honey, there's still a little bit of crystals at the bottom. So just added water, same thing. You just kind of keep shaking it up until it's all mixed up and all the crystals are gone. Usually it's better to use honey that doesn't have the crystals just because it's a little bit easier. But this is honey that I bought a few months ago. It's kind of just been in a cold environment. It's frozen up a little bit. It's not used. It's kind of crystallized. It's just how honey works. But honey doesn't go bad. Honey is one of the only foods that doesn't expire. I just find that using warm water, especially since I'm making a mead, helps because I'm going to have to add water to the brew anyways. So this kind of just gives you a head start. Plus, if you remember from the video where I talked about the different types of equipment that you need for brewing, I mentioned that oxygen in the very beginning is good. You want oxygen in your brew because it's going to just help with fermentation. So all these bubbles that are ending up in these little containers are just full of oxygen, and they're just going to end up in the brew anyways. So it's pretty good for it. It's not going to do any type of damage to it. So I can see that the crystals are starting to break up a little bit now. So just kind of keep shaking. I'm going to pour this container down the funnel. And it's pretty much empty. I might add a little bit more water just to get all that little extra, because as you can see, that's a little bit of honey. I don't want to waste honey. That's more sugar for the brew. But I'm going to mix this up and then probably add a little bit of water to these containers. So added some water to that container that had a little bit of honey on the side. And I think I've got almost all of it, so I'm just going to pour that down. Yeah, I've got pretty much all of it. I'm not going to get much better than that. So I can chuck that and just keep shaking this one and really work down the crystals. And I'm going to I'm going to show you what the brew is looking like right now while I shake this up. So as you can see, the growler is starting to get pretty filled. This is a combination of honey and water. So I'm just going to keep shaking and then pour it into my brew. And then I'm going to add enough water that this ends up being about halfway. And then I'm going to shake it all up for the must. And then I'm going to fill it up to this 1 gallon line with water. So just keep watching and we'll see how this turns out. So this is looking pretty much at the level that I want it to be for mixing. I don't want to add any more water just yet because if I fill the water up too much, it's going to be harder to mix this around. And as you can see, all of the honey is really at the bottom of here, and you really want the water and the honey to be mixed up very well. So I'm going to give it a shake, pretty much shake it until there's no more residual honey at the bottom, and then I'll fill it up with more water, shake it all together, and then we'll take a gravity reading. So just going to screw on my cap. Again, the cap's been sanitized. It was sanitized with everything else, so I'm in the clear. So I got the cap on nice and tight. There's a little hole where the airlock's going to go, so I just put my thumb over that as I shake. So I still see a little bit of crystals at the bottom, So I'm just going to keep shaking. Once you think it's shaken enough, shake for a couple more minutes. So it's finally shaken up enough that I'm pretty comfortable with it. As you can see, it starts to look more of a light brown. That's again because there's a lot of air bubbles in here now, kind of giving it that light effect. But there's water and there's honey in here, so it's very liquidy. You can kind of see that there's more foam forming on the sides. Again, that's just all air. So I'm going to go ahead and take this cap off, and I'm going to fill water just about up to the gallon line. That's because I want to make sure I have room still to add the yeast and to add the yeast nutrient, which I'm going to add more water to mix it all together, and then we'll take a gravity reading. So I just filled it up with water to almost the gallon line, and as you can see, more of a foam layer forms at the top. That's why you don't fill it all the way up when you start mixing, because you're not going to be able to really mix it with all that foam. So I'm going to go ahead, put the cap back on, and just give it a nice shake so that new water goes in and mixes evenly. That should be good. Now I'm going to go ahead and pour in the yeast. So you can use really as much as you want. The packet tells you how much you should use somewhere. I don't know. I like to use about half a packet when I pour it in. There we go. So I just eyeball it, pour in about half a packet. That should be plenty. And give it a little bit more. Too much isn't going to hurt it. Again, if anything, that's more yeast working and forming a colony that's going to go and convert all that honey into nice alcohol. And then I'm going to take my yeast nutrient. The label says to use a teaspoon, so I'm going to use a teaspoon. When it comes to yeast nutrient, I like to use exactly as much as it says, because depending on certain yeast nutrients that you use, like fermented K, it can create an off flavor. This is just a generic kind. I don't know, so I just follow how much it tells me to use. So I'll pour that all in. Good. Now I'm going to go add just a little bit more water, so it's right at that 1 gallon line. I'm going to mix it up, and then we're going to take a gravity. So a little bit more foam is forming now, and it's not because of the honey and the water. The yeast naturally create a foam. That's just the reaction that builds up from the oxygen and everything. So, get a nice little stir. Make sure the yeast can get everywhere in there. Again, that's going to form a stronger colony for your brew. And the yeast are going to consume all that nice honey, turn it into a nice mead for you. So I think that should be mixed up good enough. That foam layer went away, which makes me happy. But as you'll see, while it's brewing and over the next couple of days, this foam layer is actually going to grow up. That's why you want to make sure it's at that gallon line. Some people like to try and get as close up as they can and be a little bit greedier. I like to stay at that 1 gallon line, because if the foam builds up too much, it's going to force its way out of that airlock and you're going to have a mess everywhere. So I strongly recommend having a nice like cookie sheet that has a lip around it. That way, if it does overflow, it doesn't get all over wherever you store your brew. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take a gravity reading. So when I go to take a gravity reading, I like to use a baster, turkey baster, whatever you've got. Grab my hydrometer and my graduated cylinder. You just drop it right in there. Again, you want everything to be sanitized. This was sanitized with everything else. I just suck up the must. All right. And that should be good. So when you're taking a gravity reading, you want it to be on a nice flat level surface as such. You're going to take the hydrometer and you're going to look for the lines that have the 0.1000 on it. And then you're going to read where the level is. So once this line of must reaches a spot, it'll tell you what the gravity is. So this looks like it's at 1.112. So that's not bad. That's actually a pretty good gravity. So 1.112. Awesome. So I'll explain a little bit more about what that means. So when you take your gravity, it's hard to know exactly how much alcohol you're going to get because you don't know if the brew is going to go completely dry or not. Usually it does. However, in this instance, we've kind of run into an issue. With a gravity of 1.112, I know that this is possibly going to run to a little bit over 15% if it goes completely dry. And the reason I know that is because the equation for calculating alcohol is your starting gravity minus your final gravity, and then you multiply it by 135. So when I do that equation, I know that this is going to go just past 15%. I run into an issue with this because I'm using 71B. Now, Lalvin 71B has a maximum alcohol percent of 14%. If this is going about 15 and change, I know that that could cause a stall because it might stress out the yeast. So my question is, do I want to risk a stall and try and push the yeast beyond what they can do, or let the yeast die off at about 1.0 and change? Or do I want to try and get a little bit greedier and add more water to try and level out what that starting gravity is going to be? I personally don't want to have a stall because that just creates more issues. So I think I might try and get a little bit greedier and go past this 1 gallon line. However, I know with that, I run into the issue of foam building up and starting to cause an overflow. And I don't really want to deal with a mess. So that's kind of some of the issues that you run into when you're homebrewing is you just never know what's going to happen. Do I risk a stall? Do I risk a mess? Maybe I get lucky. I don't know. I think I'm going to try and be a little bit greedier, but not so much so that a lot of foam will build up. So I'm going to fill this up with a little bit more water, and then we're going to take another gravity reading and see if it's dropped at all. So I just added a little bit more water. I'm going to take another gravity reading and see what happens. So my mic died at this point, but I took another gravity reading and it came out to 1.108, which gives you a final alcohol percentage of about 14.58, assuming that it goes completely dry to the level of water, which is 1.000. So I'm comfortable with this because 71B can go to 14%. That's really not too far over that 14% alcohol. So I'm okay with this. We're going to slap on a label and see how this looks in a few weeks. Also, just one thing to note, when I make a wine or a mead, I always write down the date and everything that I've put in it. So 2 pounds of Wellesley Farms organic raw honey, water just past 1 gallon line, 1 teaspoon yeast nutrient, half packet Lalvin 71B. Then I write down the starting gravity. That way, if I have multiple brews going at once, or if I want to recreate this brew, I have an idea of what's going on. So in 2 weeks, I'll be able to look back and reference this and remember, oh yeah, that's what I put into it. That way, if there's a stall or something, I can kind of figure out what caused the stall. All right, guys. So it's been almost 2 months now. We're actually about a week shy of 2 months. This mead was started back on April 16th, and to me, it's showing all signs that fermentation is done. There's a good layer of lees cake at the bottom. I haven't seen any activity in the airlock, and quite frankly, this is looking really, really clear. I can put my hand on the other side and I can see at least a shadow of my hand. So again, these are all good indicators that fermentation is done, but you never really know until you take a gravity reading. When I started this mead 2 months back, I put 3 pounds of honey in it. I honestly thought I had put 2 pounds of honey in it at the time. It wasn't until I looked back at the little honey containers that I realized it was 3 pounds. So if this does go all the way to dry, we're looking at possibly 15%, which does exceed the limit of the yeast that we used. So I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't go all the way to dry, but because it's so clear and I haven't really seen any activity, just from my experience with making mead and wine, I wouldn't be surprised if it is dry. Again, yeast might tell you that it goes to 14%, or some strains might go to 18%. Again, yeast can't read, so they can always exceed that. They might stall before that. You never really know. So today we're going to take a gravity reading, and then after the gravity reading, I'm going to actually try some of this mead, kind of gauge what the level of sweetness is at. Again, the gravity reading will help us know that. And if I like it, we're going to just kill off the yeast. We're going to use some Camden tablets and some potassium sorbate. That's one way of stopping fermentation. Another way would be to pasteurize, where you would essentially cook the mead. I don't really like doing that. I've heard that it gives off flavors. For me, I like using the Camden tablets and the potassium sorbate. From my experience, it hasn't given any off flavors, and it does a really good job at stopping fermentation. So let's get into it. Let's take a gravity reading. So prior to this video, everything's already been sanitized, so everything's clean. We don't have to worry about any risk of infection or any type of bacteria getting in here because everything has been sanitized. But I'm actually really curious to see what the gravity on this is. It's at 1.000. Again, it's safe to assume that fermentation is done, but depending on how this tastes, I might want to back sweeten with some honey, and if I add more honey to it, it could kickstart fermentation some more. So using the Camden tablet and potassium sorbate to halt fermentation will prevent any further fermentation when I add honey for back sweetening effects. So let's try this. This looks good. Like, you can see how clear it is. You can even see in the tube, like you can see my hand perfectly through it. This is really clear. This looks really good. All right, let's try it. Smells really good. Wow. So I'm actually really pleased with how this turned out so far. I don't think there's any point in waiting a couple more days for the gravity to drop anymore, because I do plan on back sweetening already. So we're going to halt fermentation today. I'm going to use a Camden tablet and some potassium sorbate. I use half a teaspoon of potassium sorbate and a single Camden tablet. That's enough for 1 gallon. I already have another vessel that I'm going to transfer this into because I do want to get it off that yeast cake. And then when we go and back sweeten with the honey, I don't really want any of that on there. Also, once we put the Camden tablet, potassium sorbate, any yeast that's in there is probably going to kill off and is going to have it fall to the bottom. So I want to be able to really try and get all of that out. And in my opinion, as of right now, just the way I'm thinking, it might be a little bit harder to really tell how well the Camden tablet and potassium sorbate work if there is a yeast cake in there. So we're going to transfer this into here, and then in about 2 days, because that's how long it usually takes, about 48 hours for the potassium sorbate and the Camden tablets to completely halt fermentation. We'll come back, we'll add the honey, we'll see how the oak is doing, because I'm going to put the oak stick in today. The Camden tablet and the potassium sorbate is not going to affect that in any way that's going to be detrimental to the brew. So in a few days, we'll come back, we'll add the honey, and depending on how it is in a couple days, we might re-rack it into their own bottles, or might give it another week, week and a half, 2 weeks tops. The oak really shouldn't take that long. So when I think of traditional meads, I think of barrel aging, right? So you can use a charred oak stick. You can get these on Amazon. This came with a kit that I bought a couple years back at this point. It lasts a while, surprisingly, but it works relatively fast. You don't have to have it sit in a barrel for months or years on end. It takes a couple of weeks to really put its flavors into it. So depending on what level of oakiness you want, is relative to, your taste buds and what your preference is. So just in my experience, I know that a few days or even a couple of weeks is plenty enough. So just going to drop that right in there. Gonna re-rack the brew into here. We'll add our Camden tablets and the potassium sorbate, and then we'll come back in a few days, check on it, add our honey, maybe give it a week or two, and then it'll be time for bottling. So when it comes to re-racking, the important thing to note is that you want the vessel that has the current mead in it to be at a higher level. So I have a tray here next to me that I'm just gonna put this on top of. Again, this is elevated higher than this is. So now we can rack our brew. So just take one end, the end that suctions, obviously, you're gonna put right into the mead. I try and keep it elevated above that yeast cake for now because I don't want to suck all of that in. And then I put the other end right in the jar. Give it a couple pumps. And you just let it do its thing. And then I'm just going to tilt it a little bit because, again, I want to get as much liquid in there as possible. I can slowly slide this down. And a good thing about this racking kit that I have is that there's a cap at the bottom, so I can really rest it right on that yeast cake, and I don't have to worry too much about getting it in there. Because the goal is you want to get as much liquid as you can, especially since I waited 2 months for this to brew. I really want to try and get the biggest bang for my buck. Now, if I get a little bit of the yeast, I'm not going to be too upset because, again, I'm going to re-rack this from this jar into the bottles. So the goal is to try and get as much of it as you can, but you don't want to get a whole lot of yeast. But if you get a little bit, it's not the end of the world. Now, the little bit of bubbles that you see in here is just, there's still CO2 in here that has been built up over 2 months. I tried my best to shake it every few days, but there's still going to be CO2 in there. So that's just the CO2 degassing from in here, which is good. But it's also kind of a sign of fermentation. So there are still active live yeast in here. Again, that's an important reason why we want to add Camden tablets and the potassium sorbate. You want to stop all fermentation, then in a few days we can come back and add the honey and we don't have to worry about fermentation. So all I do is I just take one single Camden tablet, and I take half a teaspoon just drop it on in, and then the potassium sorbate I'm just going to crush up. I don't know if you saw how quickly it dissolved, but the potassium sorbate dissolved almost right away. Just take a sanitized stirring object. And again, you don't want to go crazy with the stirring because the whole point is you don't want oxidization, but you want to make sure that it gets in there. Also, I can hear it degassing, so there is still a good amount of CO2 in there. Now, if it doesn't dissolve all right away, in 48 hours it will be dissolved, so there's no need to stress about it. But it's starting to dissolve pretty good. So now I just screw on the cap, nice and tight. So I just re-sanitized and refilled this airlock. Again, I want it to have nice, fresh, sanitizing liquid in it. And again, airlocks are important because you don't want bugs working their way in and getting into your brew. Again, it should be sanitized. Anything you use when it comes to brewing should be sanitized. So that's why I re-sanitized it. Now I just put it right in there. And now I'm just going to put it aside again for a couple days. Let the potassium sorbate and the Camden tablets do their job. And then in a couple days, once it's all dissolved and all clear and I know that fermentation's halted, I'm going to add the honey for back sweetening. I'm going to give it a taste at that time because the honey doesn't need any time to take effect. What I want to take effect is the oak piece that's in there, because again, I want it to be like a traditional mead. I want some of that oaky, almost barrel-aged type flavor in there. So in a couple days, I'll add the honey, see what the flavor is like with the oakiness in it. And then depending on how I like it, might give it a couple more days, might give it another week, a couple more weeks. Again, when you make a brew, you want it to be something that you can sit down and enjoy and drink. You want it to be to your taste. So there's nothing wrong with giving it more time. You want your brew to be how you want it to be. So for me, I'm going to know in a couple of days if there's enough oak in it, and I can gauge how much more time it needs. So when you make your brew, again, don't rush it. You know, it's exciting to be making your own alcohol. You know, obviously you want to drink it right away. So if that's the case, just make more brews and stagger them out. That way you always have something fermenting and always something that's ready. If you're a little bit more patient, cool. But there's no need to rush your brew. You want it to be enjoyable. You don't want it just simply because it has alcohol in it. Or at least that's my feeling on it. You might feel differently. So again, I'm going to put this aside for a couple days, and then I'll see you again. All right, guys, so it's been just over 48 hours, and all signs of fermentation appear to be halted. So I don't know how well you can see this, but I can see two fingers when I look. It's very clear, even clearer than 2 days ago when we re-racked this. I do notice that there is another layer of least at the bottom. Again, that's what the Camden tablets and the potassium sorbate do, is anything else that's active or alive in there, they halt and essentially kill off. They don't really kill the yeast, but they prevent any type of recolonization of the yeast, and everything just drops to the bottom, including the oak piece that we had when we put it in here. It was floating. Odds are it's probably a little bit waterlogged, so it fell to the bottom. This is also looking a little bit darker. It's more of an amber color, so I can definitely tell that some of that oakiness is imparted in here. Now, I'm curious to see if the gravity has changed at all, so we're going to do a quick gravity reading, and then afterwards, we're actually going to re-rack this into a new container, and then we're going to back sweeten with some honey. We're going to see what the flavor profile is like, see if enough of the oak is in there. And again, once we add honey to it, I want to see if we can really increase that sweetness to a good tasting that I enjoy. And if all is said and done, we're going to hopefully bottle today. If not, we'll bottle in a couple of days or so. I don't imagine that the gravity has changed at all, seeing that it was pretty dry last time. It went straight to it went straight to 1.00 last time. I don't imagine it's going to drop from there. If anything, it could have dropped a couple decimal points because of the Camden tablets and potassium sorbate, but I don't expect so. I really do enjoy the look of this mead. I can definitely see that the oakiness has taken over. It's even more, I want to say, gold in color than 2 days ago. And again, it's just very, very clear. You can see everything through the other side. Yeah, so like I said, the gravity hasn't changed at all. It's still at 1.000. Again, the whole point of adding the Camden tablets and potassium sorbate was to halt fermentation. I didn't want it to go any further. I didn't feel that there was really any reason to, seeing that we're going to be back sweetening. It's already at about 15% alcohol. There's no sense in aiming for any more because that's just going to create off flavors. The stronger the alcohol, the less you really get to taste the flavors that you're trying to impart into the mead. And again, if you want more alcohol, you can really just drink more of it. So I don't really feel the need to aim for anything really much higher than this. So seeing that we took a gravity reading and we have the oak piece in it, I'm very curious to see how much of that oak is in there. So we're going to take a quick taste real quick. All right. Oh, hold on. Yeah, there's definitely some oak in there. I can smell it right off. Yeah. So a good thing to do when you are drinking mead or wine is you'll often see a lot of people, spiral their mead. It really helps you get a good sense of the smell of the mead. All right, let's take a quick sip. Oh yeah, yeah, that's really good actually. It's not overpowering in any way with the oak. But you can definitely taste it in the undertones in there. It is definitely dry. It's drier than I prefer, hence why I plan on back sweetening with some honey. But it is really good. It is something that I could drink, but I want it to be something that I enjoy a little bit more. So, for the sake of time, I'm not going to bother recording me re-racking this. You saw me re-rack it a couple days ago. I don't feel the need to show you guys how to re-rack again. Very simple. So even with the least off the bottom now, it looks even clearer. I can see this mat perfectly through it. I can see all of my fingers through the other side. I don't know how well you can with the lighting. Yeah, a little bit. So now we're just going to step feed it some honey. We've already tested what it tastes like beforehand. I took the oak stick off because, again, I'm planning on bottling today, so no need to keep it in there. It's just going to get in the way at this point. So I've got 2 containers of honey. I don't know how much we're going to need because, again, we're going to be tasting along the way. This together is 3 pounds, the same amount that I used to make this. I highly doubt we're going to use this much. The only reason I have the 2 containers is because, as you can see, it's crystallized. So I'm just going to use a little bit from each, so that way I can get the liquid and not have to play around with the crystallization. I did have it sitting in the warm sanitizer fluid to try and soften up a little bit, and I think it has, but it'll be just easier to use these 2 containers instead of just spending the time to try and crystallize it or mix around the crystallization. Because again, I don't want to aerate this mead, so I'm just going to do whatever is the easiest for me at this time. I've got all of my handy dandy tools here. I've got my honey, got my tasting glass, and I've got a spatula to help me mix. So when I pour the honey in, I want to mix, very gently. I want it to swirl. I don't want it to oxidize. So I'm not going to be shaking it back and forth. It's just going to be a nice, easy spiral just to get that honey mixed in. So let's just start with a little bit and see. So a little bit of the crystallization has gone in, but we'll make it work. All right, let's stop there and see how this is. So just nice, easy spiral motion. My goal right now is to really make sure any little crystals that did fall in get mixed in well, because I want to have an accurate taste when I go A for a tasting, but B, that way when I start bottling, I can ensure that all of them have the same flavor profile. So when I open up one mead, I want it to be the same as the other one when I try another bottle down the road. I also like to give some bottles to friends, so I want them to be able to enjoy it as well. So I just want to make sure that they're all the same. So I really want to make sure I get any little crystals mixed up. And it's looking to be pretty mixed. I see one tiny little crystal floating around still. So I'm just going to keep mixing. Let's give it a quick little taste. No, I didn't really need that much. That's fine. So I still definitely taste, not taste, but I can smell a good amount of that oakiness to it. Okay. So it's definitely a little bit sweeter. And I can still taste some of that oak to it. But still pretty dry, so it's not entirely where I want it to be. So I'd say, and again, this is a rough guess, just visually inspecting. Based on how much I've poured amongst both of these, maybe I added a pound, maybe 3/4 of a pound. Again, I'm just eyeballing this. I'm not going to be able to give you estimates when it comes to back sweetening because everybody has different taste preferences. So I could give you A, and you might replicate and do A, but it's not going to be where you want it to be. So I just recommend just pouring until it's at that level of sweetness that you like. And I can definitely tell that this is getting a little bit darker, which again makes sense because obviously it's going to be darker because the meat is it's going to be darker because the honey is darker. but if you mix it well, it'll be fine. And again, all the yeast in here, the colonies have been destroyed. They're not going to reproduce. Any dead yeast has already fallen to the bottom, and we've re-racked it off of that. So any honey you mix in here should be mixed. So we don't have to worry about any more lees falling to the bottom because there's not going to be any more yeast dying to fall to the bottom. Don't want a whole lot. Don't need a whole lot. Yeah, that's better. The thing I like about this is I can definitely still smell the oak. So I haven't lost any of that with the honey yet. So, all right, let's give it a test. Okay. Trying to think of how to describe it. It's definitely sweeter, which I do like. Still has a little bit of the oaky undertones. You smell it more than you can really taste it at this point. But it's not too sweet. It's not too dry. Okay. No, you can still get some of the oak in there. Okay. I would say it's almost there. I think if I add just a little bit more honey, it'll be right where it needs to be. So add a little bit more. I don't really want a whole lot of crystals, but it's inevitable at this point. Smell hasn't changed too much. I mean, the oak smell is definitely a little fainter, so let's give it a spin. Okay, so that's the thing I like about spinning, and the honey's a little bit in the way, but you just give it like a nice little spin, and you can get a lot of that smell. So I can definitely still smell the oak. It's not like a strong oak smell. It definitely has a mead smell. You can smell the alcohol on it. Actually, you really smell more of the alcohol on it. Again, keeping in mind that's 15% or so, give or take. But the oak smell is there. So let's give it a taste. Yep. Getting a good amount of that honey now. Yeah. Yep. I think that's right where it needs to be. I am actually very happy with that. So I think it's good where it's at. I don't feel the need to add any more honey to it. This is probably just over a pound of honey. Again, just eyeballing it. So I've step fed it enough that it's at the level that I want it at. I don't think it needs any more sweetness. It's preserved a good amount of that oak flavor to it. So I'm happy with this. So I think it's time to bottle. All right, so I've got my bottling station set up. I apologize in advance that it's definitely not the prettiest site to film at, but it's what we got. So this is what we work with. So just like when you're bottling, or rather re-racking from a jar to a jar, or your growler to a jar, or your growler to growler, whatever. When you re-rack, it's the same concept. I've got my racking tube. I'm going to give it a couple taps, and then it's going to start sucking, and it's going to go all the way down the tube into the bottle. Now, I have this little plastic piece on my tube that I like because when I want it to stop sending liquid down, I can just lock it and it halts the liquid, gives me time to move it to another bottle, and then I just unlock it. Lock, unlock. This is what it looks like. Let me try and give you an up close visual. So it just simply locks and then unlock, and that prevents the liquid from continuing down the tube. So I'm going to do this nice and slowly, and my dog decided right now is the time to drink water, so if it makes it onto this video, I apologize in advance. So does it all on its own. I'm hands off at this point, and you can see that it's slowly filling up the tube. Once it gets to right about here is usually when I lock it, because I want enough headspace to pull the tube out. So right there, boom. I could probably add a little bit more. Stop. Nice and easy. And continue down the next one. So while that's filling, just cap that one off and lock it. Get the next one ready. Lock. Maybe add a little bit more. Boom. I really like having these type of bottles because you don't have to worry about a cork and jamming anything into the bottle. It just self-seals itself. And brews that I have not halted fermentation. Unfortunately, my mic died at this time, and I didn't realize until after recording. But, as I was saying, I really like these flip-top bottles. It saves you the hassle of having to stuff in a cork. There's also been brews that I've bottled in the past that have become unsealed due to pressure on the bottle, whether it's because of CO2 that never escaped during fermentation, or possibly as a result of not halting fermentation altogether on a brew that I had thought had gone completely dry. I have had a lot of success with these flip tops, and I think it's largely due to the fact that it latches onto the bottle when you close it, and I think it just does a really good job of locking and preventing the bottle from becoming unsealed. As I reach the end of bottling, there's going to be a little mead left over that does not fill an entire bottle. That's fine, honestly. I do my best to try and get it all as I don't want to waste any, especially after waiting 2 months for this brew to finish. So I'm trying my best to get it all. I'm definitely oxidizing a little bit, but I'm not overly concerned because A, this brew came out to 15%, so I'm not worried about it turning to vinegar. And B, I'm going to drink this within the next few days or so, and it's going right into the fridge, so I'm not too worried about it going bad or creating off flavors. All right, and that's all I have for you guys today. It's always so much fun to make your own mead at home. I know I enjoy it a lot. You never really know how it's going to turn out. You kind of just play around with the flavors and shoot for something. And sometimes you're just surprised with either how good it turns out, or some instances you're just surprised with how not so good it turned out. This week, in my opinion, it turned out amazing. I'm very happy with it. I added that oak stick to it to add some of that more barrel-ish aged type of flavor. I was aiming for that traditional type of mead, and it came out, I want to say, just as good as I thought it was going to be, if not a little bit better. I've got a lot of bottles out of it, plenty for myself, plenty to give to some family and friends, so I'm very happy with how this turned out. I hope you enjoyed this week's video. As usual, feel free to like and subscribe. If you have any comments, again, feel free to drop those down below. And other than that, I will see you guys in the next video.